Hello and welcome to the latest webinar in the Elemental Talks program. Today we're looking at the importance of healthy buildings in our session sponsored by ABB. My name's Jim McClelland. I'm the founder and editor of SustMeme, home to both the magazine and the top 500 rankings. Joining me on our expert panel are Howard Porter, CEO BEMA, the UK Trade Association, manufacturers and providers of energy infrastructure technologies and systems. Sean Hill, Associate Sustainability and Wellbeing, Element 4 Group, and Matthew Durden, EMEA Business Development at ABB. It's all live with Q&A to finish, so pop your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen or on the side. You pose them, I'll ask them. These guys, I'll answer them. So the whole webinar program is hosted and produced by Elemental, which is www.elementalexpo.com. It's the online community for professionals focused on innovation in heat, water, air, and energy, the vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. You'll find the full diary of events on the website, a whole range of upcoming webinars. You can also view the back catalogue on a broad range of topics with a who's who of great speakers, all free to access. There are also in-depth interviews to watch on demand, including a fascinating one-on-one session on exactly today's topic with Matt Durden himself. So by way of a very brief intro from me, factors in play for healthy buildings today. Greater focus on staff well-being than ever before. Advancing technologies for building management systems, simplicity of control, but with fully customizable settings, automation of functions, use of sensors. In principle, by addressing the factors we know to be the causes of unhealthy buildings, such as poor aesthetics, insufficient lighting, being too hot or too cold, damp, stuffy environments. In theory, we can re-energize a workforce to feel valued and motivated. In practice, implementable measures to support wellness might include some of the following: comfortable, controllable space temperature and air quality, good natural and artificial lighting, also things like better wayfinding and signage to support navigation, intuitive and non-imposing security and access features, plus IT that actually works and supports individuals' activities, which would be welcome for many of us, I imagine. Benefits are multiple: improves staff morale and productivity. We know it helps talent retention and recruitment, reduced absenteeism, plus, of course, energy cost savings, shrinking carbon footprints. Win, 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 win. So let's get into the tech and the talk, zoom in on all things healthy, and bring in our panel. Right, so as we start to explore the topic of healthy buildings, I'd like to begin by asking each of my esteemed panelists to introduce themselves, give us their take on why healthy buildings are important and how perceptions have changed actually in a post-pandemic world. So briefly, who are you? Where do you fit into the puzzle? Why are healthy buildings important? And what difference has COVID made? First, from the perspective of a representative body, please. Howard.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Also, good afternoon, I should say. I think the issue of healthy buildings has, prior to the pandemic, I think was not taken desperately seriously. And I think some of the measures that Jim has mentioned, some of the issues, I think were always on the agenda, but was never really taken forward. And as you know, all of us have worked or do work in offices or other commercial or semi-industrial premises, we'll know that there was some good practice, there was some less good practice, but it was pretty much hit and miss whether or not you happened to work for a company who rented an office that had good kit or not so good kit. I think certainly the pandemic has almost completely changed that. And as we look to what I think has been termed the new norm, that's rather an old-fashioned term now, I think that was termed at the start of the pandemic, we are looking at a situation where, in order to, I think the word entice workers back into offices and buildings is probably the right word, because there's going to be extra questions that each individual worker will have about what the company has done. If not, let's face it, if people have spent 18 months working from home or working in a different environment, they're going to need to be very much assured that the working environment is clean, is healthy. There's no extra risk of being in that building for an extended period of time, particularly if it is shared with other colleagues. So first, within BEMA, we have a big focus on this within our ventilation group, but also other members, including ABB, will be looking at other types of technologies that can facilitate a better indoor environment going forward. And we've recently formed a new focus group in BEMA looking at safe and healthy buildings to really bring together all the safe and healthy aspects that our members can bring.
Excellent, thank you, Howard. And so in this new normal or post the revolution in terms of the agenda almost, you're virtually talking about developers, landlords, employers selling the healthy credentials of their buildings as places to enter and inhabit. Sean, as a specialist in sustainability and well-being, what is your take on things at present?
Yeah, thank you. In my role, I'm used to consulting and advising clients directly on their practice for health and well-being, where they are, where we can bridge gaps and how they can take steps to improvements. And also on construction projects, we deliver like the Well, Fit Well, Reset Air standards, which were all geared up about delivering healthy, productive environments that people want to occupy. And I think pre-pandemic, this was almost an aspirational thing on projects where clients and investors would go for it, but would go for it in a limited way. They would see it as a bit of an investment, something that's not really necessary. And I think that's completely changed, as Howard had said there, he summed it up really well, that people are now looking at this as a must because they want to get people back in the workplaces. And people are going to ask questions. People are going to want to know, why do I need to come back into the workplace 5 days a week, and also challenge that. And businesses and building owners are going to have to answer the questions and take it seriously, because as we know, a lot of people are in their safe havens at home now. Mm-hmm. Also, they'll have been exposed to a different way of life, potentially having more time with the family, a lot less time commuting. So it's almost as well the experience of the day. Why do I need to take that time to go to the office? And it's going to have to be a completely different experience. I think the office of the future is going to have to be, firstly, like you mentioned, it's going to have to have visibility of the environment and be able to see when things, what's happening on a live basis, and technology has a big part of that, but also engaging with employees and occupants on how it's performing and making sure that they keep up to that, because people have performed and have been able to do their duties at home. So the office is going to have to be something that entices people to go in there, and companies are going to have to bring them benefits, and health and well-being has a direct impact on people. So the environment quality, the engagement quality, the whole social aspect of going to work and in the office is going to be a big thing moving forward as well. So yeah, it's brought the topic of health and well-being to a much wider audience, whereas it was very much industry focused before the pandemic. Everybody now knows much more about how their environments impact them. So there's going to be a lot more questions asked on the environments that people are stepping into.
Excellent, and no doubt an overdue shift in many ways, but there'll be challenges in terms of trade-offs between that kind of aspiration and risk you talked about. And I know, Matt, I've heard you speak of moving from desirables to essentials. As a global technology leader of built environment on behalf of sponsors ABB, how do you see the landscape at present?
Good afternoon. So as Jim has said, I'm Matthew Durden. I'm responsible for business development, global markets within ABB. So I work in a group within ABB called Electrification, one of our 4 groups within the business. And within our business, we've got separate themed businesses. So power distribution, smart power, smart buildings, installation products, and building automation. So all of the things that come together to form the healthy building. Our business always has been driven by global megatrends, which are directly relevant to the healthy building. So we're driven by the well-being agenda. So everybody expects now, more so after COVID, that the working environment will be as good, if not better, than the place you live in. urban lifestyle. What's the numbers? 2050, 70% of people will live in cities, according to the UN. So we've got to get this right. Sustainability, these are now part of many businesses' credentials. You want to do business with somebody that has got the eco credentials. It is a differentiator in the marketplace. We're also now thinking about clean energy. So the healthy building is probably going to be electrically powered. We look within that, within energy, electric vehicles. We're working on projects where you bring your vehicle to work and you actually put power back into your work environment. It's all change. And furthermore than that, we've got the digitization. We couldn't have had lockdown in the way that we've had it if we hadn't had a digital revolution just a number of years before. Teams never existed. So I work globally with companies to look at solutions to their, I hate the term, American term, care-abouts. And before and after COVID, it's all about flexibility, sustainability, the wellness agenda, cost of ownership, productivity. It's all of those things. And if you look at that, it varies with the stakeholder, which particular things are important. And we've already touched on building owners, occupiers, users, etc. But we've sort of got two angles that we foster on this, which is the viewed internally bit. So that's the healthy building. We look at air quality, heating, EV charging provision. Also, health can be the cost of the building. Is it healthy on the balance sheet? We're going to stick with this one, or we're going to move somewhere else. And then we've got the external healthy building, which is viewed, if you're not in the building, by its eco credentials. Has it got grass on the roof? Has it got a chimney? You know, this is part of your corporate appeal. And I know as ABB, we want our buildings to look like we care about the eco credentials. So what we're seeing is the agenda's the same after COVID, but it just accentuates some of the particular issues. So as we said some time ago, Jim, what was a nice to have is now an essential. What used to be something that you aspired to, say for instance, maintenance in HVAC equipment, where you would happy enough to do something based on time, that was okay. You went and changed the filters every 6 months. Now it's all about proactive maintenance and knowing on a minute by minute, hour by hour basis, because people will demand the air quality. They'll need to know they're safe, and heaven forbid there's some litigious action on the back of somebody that got ill because they went to work. So all of these nice to haves now become must haves. And just finally, what our belief is that the healthy building in the office form will now not be a place that you go to work in a solitary mode. That will be perhaps done at home. You will go there to meet and collaborate, and also meet your visitors and other companies that you work with. So same office, same area, fewer people using it for different. So we see an environment where we're almost choreographing the moves of people within that building so that they don't get infected. It's a whole new paradigm. So we're working towards that sort of thing. So hopefully I can contribute some thoughts as we move forward through this session.
That's great, thank you, and Matthew. And yeah, I think I've said in a previous session that it's not so much back to work as back to the future of work. It's interesting how already we're talking about demand, we're talking about perceptions, managing expectations. There's much more pull potential. It's not just push, but there is also that almost license to operate element to things going forward. So in this middle section of the debate, I've titled it Challenges, Conflicts and Complexities. So I'd like to lift up some stones, and I'd like to dig into some of the issues that are difficult and challenging at the moment. So zooming in, I'd like to look at things that are not moving faster in terms of mainstreaming these kinds of solutions and systems we've been talking about, particularly here in the UK. So what's the problem? Is it innovation, scale, cost, culture, skills, standards? What needs to change to accelerate and make healthy happen? So Sean, to kick us off, what's top priority at present for healthy buildings tech? Is it innovation or is it scale?
I don't think it's innovation. I think innovation's there. You know, we speak with technology providers. We obviously are aware of the technology that's available to be plugged into buildings, and quite honestly, it's quite fascinating the type of technology that's coming through, not just for what it does, but how you can integrate it into buildings. I think that the challenge is is scale, but it's also a strategy that gives, you know, if we take existing buildings, an opportunity to scale up how they can bring buildings forward to where you would have the opportunities with a construction or a renovation project to invest in new technology. So I think it's education and it's a strategy to look at buildings, because existing buildings do have technology, they do have data. We just generally don't use a lot of it to or look at how it impacts health and well-being. So I think it's taking that first step in looking at buildings, looking at your building, your operation, where you are, and how you can view what you've got, make use of what you've got, and then take step forwards to be able to then integrate new bits of technology. And I think the fascinating thing about technology at the moment, if we think about environment technology or controls technology, the way that it's going, a lot of that can be integrated and almost bolted on into existing systems. So, and it can also then, when new technology comes in place, that can also be delivered and bolted on later down the line. So it's becoming a lot more flexible and a lot more doable from an investment point of view. So we're not thinking about having to completely strip out existing technology and look at a full new system. The way IoT sensors are going and technology along down that route is that we've got opportunities to bring existing buildings up to speed, not to say that they're not performing right, but create a visibility, you know, put sensors in there so we know what the environment's doing, how healthy the environment is, how productive it is. And once you have a visibility on the environment and you're getting that data in, then you can make steps to improve, whether it's, you know, we're wasting energy or we're spending too much on energy, or whether it's that we need to do more to improve the health and well-being of the people that are going to be occupying that, will have knock-on effects, whether we know if we need to change filters, whether we need to deliver higher volumes of air or better quality air into the building. These are all things, but without knowing about the building and knowing about the environment, how it's performing, it's difficult to make them steps. So it's a strategy to get to that point. So I think innovation is definitely there. It's scalability, it's education, and also for the facilities teams, knowing what to do with the data and actually how that impacts the performance of the building and how they can maintain that as well.
Excellent, thank you. And yeah, I mean, we're talking about built-in flexibility, and I'm sure there's great appetite for that post-COVID amongst corporates who are obviously committing to leases or not, as the case may be, you know. And it's interesting to think then of speaking in terms of wellness and well-being as a strategic issue in the physical built environment, which is perhaps not how the conversation was had previously. But then looking at especially culture, if you like, business culture, Matthew, do we need a new investment mindset when it comes to this kind of tech beyond obviously just cost?
Yes. One of the things that I've become increasingly aware of is within the large corporates, if you can't measure it, it won't happen. And one of the key issues around wellness is there is no defined standard. There is no resolute measurement, as there would be on air quality, as there would be on electrical compliance, etc. You've got a point to aim for. Wellbeing, wellness, yes, there's various bodies that profess to tell us what that is, and we mostly know what wellness looks like. But for a corporate to invest, they will need to know what standard they're aiming for. And there'll be a reluctance to do that because although there is an abundance of technology, there's not a consistency of technology. And the big corporates that I'm finding are kicking back against investment want to know, what's the standard? What's the framework around this? Examples are given to me. Everybody has a drawer full of old technology that they thought was a good idea at the time. They don't want to be in that space. So it's about standards. It's about working towards standards. And this is what the big corporates are looking like. They can't even come up with something that measures wellness. Some people will measure it against days of absenteeism. Some people will measure it against one of the ones I saw was typing output. At different, space temperatures. That's very hit and miss. So how do you actually define wellness so that you can actually do your return on investment case heading towards that purchase?
I mean, obviously making the business case for sustainability and associated issues has long been the topic, but as we always say, try making the case for unsustainability, and that stacks up really badly. That stacks up really badly. So
every pound is a prisoner in the corporate.
Exactly. And your talk about measuring leads me nicely to what I want to ask Howard about, which is exactly that. Does the industry actually have the skills, and are there the standards in place to drive that uptake?
It's interesting listening to the other two speakers that there are, one way of pushing this is to make sure that the building regulations, which basically govern particularly new building refurbishment, are enhanced. And certainly we're aware of government plans for there to be enhanced ventilation regulations.
Yep.
That's only for new build and major refurbishments. So that's limited. However, once it's in the regulations, it's much easier for people in Sean's business to say, well, this is for the new build. You should do the same as new build in the existing build. So I think that is a regulatory benefit, and we hope that when we come out of this, the government doesn't forget about this, and that is indeed the new regulations going forward. And I think that will also help the manufacturers also get investment to develop their products if they see a regulatory backbone of all this. I think in terms of the technology itself and how that goes forward, there is a balance to be played between, clearly, as I very simply do it, at the moment, if you're in an office, there's a lot of windows open. Now, that may get you, that's uncontrolled, and you're losing a hell of a lot of heat, which doesn't exactly meet the sustainability requirements or the benefits that you're trying to enhance. It's all well and good having lots of green technology, but if you are effectively releasing it out of the window, it's not a desperately good system. So going forward, I think we would say we need to have to get that air quality better, is to invest in the technology, be that controlled ventilation, monitoring of air quality, which means that there is, and also heat recovery systems, because ideally from a technology perspective, we want to increase the air change rate. I'm talking purely here about air quality and the removal of aerosols. We increase the ventilation rate, but make sure that we don't lose the associated heat that is in that air. Down to the physics of it, the air has got heat in it. It could also have contaminants. We want to remove the contaminants, but not lose the heat. And that is the holy grail of how one can do this forward. And there are some technologies that are there now can do this. In my view, there'll be a lot more as this becomes much more part of the business. More innovation will go into better systems and new systems, how that can actually be achieved. And I think last point I really make is on monitoring and consumer. It'll be interesting to see how, if there are personalized information for the office user in terms of air quality. Now, it's maybe very difficult to do, but if you're all sitting at your computer in office, do you get an indication every morning or hour by hour what the current situation is with the air quality in that room? Now, that has never, I imagine, been thought about before. It's technically feasible. Is that the sort of thing that maybe we may have to go into?
Excellent point. And that's that level of customization. I mean, we're beginning to think about personal space in terms of individual climate. I know there are cars, for example, where you can have different climate controls for the passenger and the driver's seat, even though they are side by side. And obviously, with COVID and social distancing, this is going to have a different kind of emphasis going forward. But now I think I'd like, having looked at some of the challenges, and now like to look at some of the positives, the lessons, the hopes. And I've seen one or two questions, and at least one via Twitter. If you'd like to, audience, pop them in the Q&A section, and we'll be able to give them a read and answer them following the panel debate. But now the third section, really, having looked at some of the difficulties and the problems, if you like, I'd like to put not our rose-tinted spectacles on, but our positive hats, look at successful, sustainable approaches, moving the market forward, raising the bar. I'd like to finish with a look at how well it might go. So, Matthew, to kick us off, future gazing, what might good actually look like for healthy buildings, just say in the next 5 to 10 years?
Okay, so as I was saying, it's going to be a place we go less frequently. It's going to be something that's probably planned. We won't just be working there. We'll be meeting, collaborating. It'll be used as a place to meet visitors, etc. So it's a whole different paradigm. Yes, technology will become pervasive in that space. There's no doubt there's enough technology. It's just how to harness it. I think that we'll probably see over the next 10 years, there'll be the expected norm. That might be that I get on my phone and I buy an app. I make sure I can get into the office on a certain day and I've not hit the threshold for the number of people in the building. Because as Howard points out, once we start charging up the building with extra people, it used to be 2 monitors and a printer was the same as having another person in the office. So there will be a limit because, as Howard points out, we will have to change the air more frequently. So there will be a new standard for air quality. I think the figure is every 1 degree of change can be up to 10% on fuel cost in certain types of buildings. So that's going to have to be carefully thought about. And I think it will be continuously monitored, and we will have AI machine learning tech that will help balance the number of people in the building against the airflow, against the target for fuel consumption. And we may even get to the end of the month where it says, you don't really need to be here. We'll take you in next month because we're reaching our sustainability target. We'll probably travel there on an electric vehicle of some sort. I see public transport has got some issues of its own to get us back on the trains. And when we do arrive, it'll be a carbon neutral deal between us and the business to go in. I see travel arrangements being made via apps, the best way to get to the office, meeting the fewest number of people to arrive in time for the meeting I've already said I want to go to. That will all happen, and that will be driven by small business startups that will have the great ideas. Some of them will succeed, others will get bought up into mainstream, into the big 4 or 5 companies that deal in this sort of technology, and it will become the norm. We'll see IoT calm down a little bit because there's no amount of data that we can take in, but we actually don't do a lot with it. So that will calm down, and we'll see more reliable IoT. We'll see different measures of transmission. No, we won't be going on, to work on a drone. I may be wrong. I was wrong about COVID, but we won't be going to work on a drone. We won't be flying in there. We won't be using a jetpack. In reality, it will be an advance on what we're already doing. And don't quote me on the jetpack. I've seen some of these things in Dubai.
Exactly. So, thank you. So, yeah, we're not going full Jetsons just yet, but yeah, I mean, we've already seen it in some, obviously touted. It's almost the year doesn't go by without a new building being touted as the most intelligent or the greenest or the most sustainable. But for example, the Edge in Amsterdam, I think it was Deloitte's HQ, they had a lot driven by apps, told you where to park your car when you arrived, when you came in, it was all hot desking where you were working. The lift came down to meet you by the time you reached it. But I think you had individual kind of climate control settings, all done via your phone where you sat down, etc. All that kind of thing. But I think some of the occupants were more excited about the fact that the coffee machine on their floor remembered how many shots they took in their flat white. But it was a very customized environment. And as you say, obviously that some of that was demonstration technology, perhaps. But, it is already out there. It is already happening. And maybe as Sean said, in some cases, it's a matter of scaling and rolling it out, some of these things, rather than reinventing. So wearing your entrepreneurial hat, Howard, how excited should we be about healthy buildings, the market growth, the opportunities? If you were going to pitch me on the prospects, how would you put it?
Well, I think from a technology provider perspective, if you're in the ventilation game, I'd be very excited. But it has to be the right type of ventilation, and I think if I was in a technology company that hadn't invested in smart tech, I'd be regretting that, because I think it has to be the combination of of good quality air movement products, but with the smart tech that allows it to be managed properly. I think where the innovation probably will come, and I agree with Matthew to an extent, it will come from the smaller players. A lot of, again, some will fail and some will succeed. Is in that personal space in terms of recognizing the energy efficiency, the carbon content, and the whole way in which the electrification of transport, of heat, of the air quality, all of that, I would imagine a lot of particularly younger members of the staff in the next 10 years will demand much more of this. And I think that's the opportunity for those real innovators to think, how am I going to innovate in this right way? And as one of the points I'd like to make, we've been focusing here, I think thus far, a lot on big corporate premises. The majority of businesses are not in new fancy offices. The majority are in relatively old, a lot made in the 60s, not desperately well performing. And I think we have to recognize that the solutions for your new big multi-billion pound centre of London premises is very different to somebody's, let's take a lawyer's office with 5 people in a converted house or in a converted 1970s office building somewhere. Very, very different environments. So I think in terms of technology, there will be solutions for integrated into the genuine, good quality, high quality situations, and probably more ad hoc solutions that allows the boss of a lawyer's firm to put the right, systems in that 1950s house that they've converted.
Good point. And I think relating perhaps to what Sean said earlier, there are things that can be bolt on, that can be retrofitted. There is a lot of flexibility depending on what little you may have in place already, and I think one of the phrases we always use in sustainability circles is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There's a lot of really underperforming property. And so some improvement, albeit not absolutely state of the art, might be a dramatic advance and greatly improve the value and the comfort and enjoyment factor for those in the property itself. So then finally, before we go to Q&A and get those extra questions coming through, Sean, how much will alignment of sustainability, and in some cases sustainability can become a bit of a single issue thing around energy and carbon these days, but take it however you like, alignment of sustainability and the wellbeing agendas really drive change?
I think at the moment we've got sustainability as one conversation, and we've got health and well-being as a separate conversation, and I definitely think they're getting joined up a lot more now. But the fact is, if we live more sustainable, if we live and thinking about energy and thinking about carbon, we actually are providing and going towards healthier environments. If we commute less, we have less cars on the road. If we take different opportunities to commute with mass transit, with buses and trains, we reduce the amount of cars on the road. If we decide to actively commute and get around, then again, we're reducing the amount of pollution that we're putting out into the environment. I mean, Howard mentioned earlier about buildings opening windows to let fresh air in, and actually the question is it fresh air? It's not actually, it's outside air. It's air that we are bringing in that we perceive to be fresh, but it's not actually. In many cases, like Matthew mentioned, we're going to be living, 70% of people are going to be living in urban areas, urban situations. Probably we're already at that where people are working. We commute into these areas. So the environments are so important that the more sustainable that we can live our lives, the healthier our environments are going to be, because we're going to reduce pollution, we're going to reduce the generation of harmful pollutants that are affecting our environments. Coming on to the health and well-being side of things, one of the positive things when we look at the standards such as well and fit well, as they've progressed over the years, what they've recognized is that it's okay to do spot checks to get a certification, but actually the ongoing monitoring of environments is more important and than just taking a spot check in time to say, yeah, that building was healthy on that day in that period. So when you look at the standards now and some of the features that are coming into play and how they've been adapted, they're really focusing more on getting buildings and people going for these standards to monitor ongoing conditions, not only monitor them, but provide access to the data for everybody who's in that building so that they can make a choice on where they want to be, if they want to come into the office that day, but have that information and data readily available for everybody, so that they can actually make a decision on going into the building. And the facilities teams are also able to maintain the buildings to a high level. So we are seeing now that the requirements are more of the ongoing requirements to maintain healthy. It's not just to get a certificate on the wall and we're healthy. The building is a living, breathing, moving, adaptable environment, and it needs to be kept on top of. Existing buildings are going to be 80% of our building stock still in 2050. And like Howard said, there has to be a solution where we can't just focus on buildings that are going to be renovated or new buildings that are going to be coming into play, because there will be investment there and there will be more investment in healthy technology. What do we do with the existing building stock where people are still going to be operating these buildings? So we have to look at awareness plans and strategies so that, okay, we can't just retrofit a ventilation system in there, but we can get a visibility of the environment and we can make better decisions and how we occupy the environments and how we can improve them. So I think that's what we need to focus on as well, making sure that we're all aware of the things that we can do to get all the buildings, not just the new ones and the renovated buildings, up to speed and give them an opportunity to be more healthy and be more productive by making them decisions.
Excellent. And it is that question of scale. And now, right, we are moving on to opening matters up to our virtual floor with a live Q&A. And I've had a couple of questions come through via social as well, but if you pop them in the box there for the Q&A via Zoom, keep them coming. As I say, you pose them, I'll ask them. Howard, Sean and Matthew will answer them. The first one I have for you guys picks up a little bit of what Sean was just saying. It's come in via LinkedIn, actually. It's asking about, do we see the possibility for unhealthy buildings to ultimately become like stranded assets? I think what they're referring to here is the idea that we have with things that are locked into a fossil fuel market, increasingly becoming less and less viable economically, and ultimately almost like rusting decommissioned oil rigs stuck out at sea. They're literally stranded assets. They're uninvestable and their value has gone through the floor. So could we envisage that seriously unhealthy buildings might actually take on that pariah effect of being stranded assets? I don't know. Matthew, would you like to comment? Could you see it going that direction?
It does. It does go that direction, doesn't it? You know, I remember driving through Birmingham 10 years ago and they were flattening buildings. I think, why? Why would they flatten that? The basics are in the economics of it. The state that it's in at the point it becomes up for release or selling to an investor, somebody makes a decision that it's not worth putting the money in it to bring it up to current standards. And certainly COVID is not gone down well with the facilities management world, because office spaces, building space are likely to be less, but the quality is going to have to be higher. So there will be a point where a building is just uneconomic to actually carry out what's necessary to bring it up to an acceptable standard, be it sort of class 1 high tech, absolutely fantastic inner city solicitor's practice, to a sort of level 3 blue collar call center. They all have their separate economics, and if it's not viable, it sits empty for a while and then somebody knocks it down.
Yeah.
Exactly. I don't know. Howard, would you have a comment on that? Can you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to recognize that. Okay, I would admit I'm London centric. I've worked in London for 22 years. It's the same in other major cities, that probably when the offices of the future will be the better end. So in the centre of London, the Gherkin's going to be full. The Shard's going to be full because it's quality stuff and they'll do the right thing. But coming back to the thousands of offices that are a bit shabby and not great, I think rather than necessarily being demolished, they'll be converted to flats. They will not be required because the number of offices will be less, and they will tend towards the quality, environmentally friendly, well ventilated, healthy, well-being premises. I think, I mean, it all depends on rental rates as well. If they fall, then there'll be a move towards the better end. And then actually the problem will be, yes, they might be derelict and not required, but they could be then converted for a different use. Not all of them, not all will be appropriate, but a lot of those, I think there's a big opportunity to reconvert them into social housing.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they're not being used, you know.
I think almost what you're talking about there is almost a sort of process of natural selection within real estate, especially in higher demand areas like central London, for example. You know, Sean, are you actually aware of those kind of conversations starting where property owners are worried about the ongoing viability, literally, of their properties, that they fear they're dropping off the bottom of the ladder unless they spend a lot of money?
I think the projects that we're involved in, I mean, they are renovation and new build projects where they're delivering on the healthy building standards. I think the questions that we're getting now asked by the real estate guys that are marketing and selling the buildings are so much more driven by the health and well-being of these buildings. You know, what is the ventilation rate? How are you filtering the air? How are you providing, you know, they are now coming from businesses, and businesses are asking them questions because they know the occupants are going to be asking them questions. So if you can't answer them questions, there's going to be you know, these buildings that are currently there that are not obviously providing the assurances are going to drop off potentially unless they look at some investment and how they can improve, you know, where they are now. And I think what Howard, there's a really good point. I mean, potentially the way that offices are going, city centres aren't going to be filled with as many office buildings, as in just offices, as they were. I think there's going to be a movement towards getting people to be living in cities, but providing a way of living, whether they're converted to apartments. But the apartments buildings now, when you look at big cities, are having gyms, are having co-working spaces and cafes. It's going to be, I think, also these buildings that are going to give this sort of quality of life that if you want to be in the city, you almost to employers, you being able to work in a co-op space or have an apartment or a space to work in, you're going to obviously be maybe more attractive, and I think the cost of rent as well and places like London are going to need to be assessed, because, you know, we need to get more people into the city, and we are going to have less offices because of the way it's going. But providing these almost like vertical communities, I think it's going to be obviously another way of potentially of getting young professionals living in the cities and also being able to still work and afford to work in these places.
Nice point about future cities, and we're now getting a little flurry of questions. So maybe if I ask a couple at once, and I'll leave it to the panel to just throw their hand up and/or answer one or two of them. So first off, we have one from Katerina Kryzhanivska, who asks, this is kind of an opportunity for entrepreneurs, if you like, and startups. She says it would be interesting to discuss how solutions providers for IAQ, indoor air quality, innovations can get into the market digitally right now, which is some of what we've been talking about. So how in particular startups can access, you know, strategic construction projects and pilot their technologies. So how can startups and new tech get in, especially around IAQ? And the other question, which is kind of different, is from Mark Bellinger, London renowned for older Georgian Victorian buildings, listed, cultural implications, famous, you know, 10 Downing Street, House of Parliament. He's saying surely they'll have to implement lots of smart tech. Old buildings will need to be brought up to standard. And the UK, we're not alone in this, but housing stock, we have the oldest pretty much in Europe on average. And heat loss, one of the factors is exactly that we have older, an awful lot of it built pre-1946. So, but we're talking about commercial here. So two nice questions there. One, how do startups get into the market? Two, old buildings, aren't we going to have to implement a lot of smart tech to do something? So,
do you want me to take the one on the getting into the market?
Please, be nice. Away you go.
Okay, so that is sort of a business development and a business startup question. In my experience, it's a case of you can't boil the ocean, but you do need to start moving your solution and product. So a lot of the big companies do have facilities where they can incubate new products and new solutions.
Yep.
So they'll join a sort of a tech group, a few that I know are distributed around the world. We know Silicon Valley has big companies there that actually deal with IT startups. I know Israel talks about security, and in the UK we have big companies that incubate startups in the HVAC and controls industry. So that would be my first choice to look at if it wasn't in fact a product that could be sold standalone. And if it was standalone, what part of the building does it actually form? And would it need to be compatible with other systems to function? So therefore, those other systems are the way to go to find out how to put your product into the marketplace. I hope that makes sense. And if they want to do whoever put that question, if they want to do a separate little email thing, I'll point out a bit more on that.
Thank you. That interoperability. So, Sean, Howard, on the startups, but also on the older listed cultural buildings.
Yeah, I think on the startup, if you look at the indoor air quality sensors, and they've gone through a number of iterations over the years where we've had sensors that have come into the market that have been working on what they call algorithm type basis. So they will provide some parameters and use some equivalent parameters to measure other things like VOCs and whatnot. But I think when you look at the sensor market now has definitely grown and developed and I think looking at it from a point of view of indoor air quality, look at the standards that are driving the change and driving the initiative for indoor air quality. Look at the parameters that they're asking you to measure and make sure that you've got the equipment in there and the right equipment to be able to deliver the data and the ongoing monitoring. Reset Air, for example, is an ongoing air quality monitoring standard. It's a global standard, and if you look at their requirements for us as a sensor manufacturer to be used within their certification, you've got to go through a number of steps, and it's quite difficult because of a number of technical issues with sensors. So it's obviously knowing where your place is and knowing how you can implement some of these standards that are driving, the agenda for indoor air quality and health and well-being. And as you say, a lot of old buildings, like we've said in the conversation, are going to need to understand their environments more. It's not viable to say that they're going to be able to invest in air solutions day one, but providing a visibility on your conditions to make them steps. If you don't know where you are and you don't know how your building's performing, it's very difficult to make an informed decision on how you can improve them. And there's a lot of buildings in that situation, and the way that the IoT sensors and technology is going, you can have good quality information from that and be able to use that to then make an investment plan and steps forward in how you improve these old buildings.
Nice point, sir. Especially you're saying perhaps with older buildings, if you're plotting your path towards a healthier future, you need to know where you're starting from on the map.
Correct.
That's effectively what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Howard.
I think there's a couple of points coming also, I think, from Sarah Deakin in terms of are we going to actually live in it? And I was thinking exactly the same myself, that going forward, if you look at the buildings where they are, I think there's going to be very different demands for those existing commercial buildings going forward, whether it is because in center of big cities people are not going to want to travel and are much prefer to live in a small commuter town, go to an office in that small commuter town. I think that's very, very much likely to happen. And I mentioned earlier on that the fact, I can say myself, I've been commuting London for 22 years. I have saved a lot of money this year, not paying the train into London, an awful lot of money. And am I desperately keen to start paying it again? No. Yeah. And many, many people will feel that way. And I think that just exacerbates what I think people have said about going into a central location. There has to be something that gets you to go there. I think as Matthew said earlier on, the office, to go and sit there and tap away on your computer, well, you can do that at home. You can do that anywhere. But going into the office has to be a different experience almost. And as someone said, meeting clients, meeting your colleagues, developing strategies, and having some social aspects integrated with that work environment is probably what we need. But I think in terms of the point about Victorian buildings, yes, the architectural value has to be retained, but there's an awful lot of buildings in London that are not architecturally valuable, an awful lot. So I think, yes, in central London, we have to recognise to work with the SMEs. But once you go out into the old 1960s industrial estates, there's nothing pretty about the majority of those buildings. And we have to think, yeah, laterally, how do we take these things forward in all towns and cities in this way forward?
I think, and for those who obviously couldn't see that, Sarah Deakin's question was, are people really going to want to live in these compact cities? She was responding, I think, perhaps to what especially Sean and Howard had been saying earlier. Do we need to rethink our strategy and encourage people to live out in the country, smaller towns, and refurb those buildings? And I guess as a northerner, this is my cue to say, you know, we have got a little bit London-centric in some of the discussion. Obviously, there are other hot spots in terms of HQs and regional HQs like Central Manchester or Birmingham or whatever, or Glasgow. But are we going to need to be thinking more about rollout in the provinces and beyond London, beyond the M25, but also beyond those hubs I've just mentioned, such as major northern cities or major Scottish cities, or in Wales and Cardiff? You know, we're used to working from home now, but what's maybe the halfway house of a rollout sort of into towns, smaller towns and areas which need the economic activity up to a point?
I think
Jim, could I?
Sorry. Yeah, sure, Matthew. Sorry, jump in.
I'll just quickly. I think the development of the obviously communal workspaces now is going to be a big thing. I think a lot of big companies are looking at investing now in not just leasing big spaces, but leasing flexible spaces. When you look at like the office group, when you look at these types of companies, I think big companies now will look to invest more in these flexible workspaces, so where they can say to someone, you know, rather than, you know, having to go into the city, actually you've got the option of working in 30, 40 different spots around the UK, and probably there's one closer to you that you can book an hour or 2 hours in there, and that can be with a client or with a colleague. And I think that's going to be one of the big developments in the future, that these co-op working spaces where they have cafes, they have flexible working spaces will be a big part of that.
Yeah, good point. And I think that picks up, we used to talk about digital nomads. Well, of course, travel bans have meant we're anything but that. But Matthew, you were wanting to comment then a bit on that.
2 points. Two points I'd like to raise. The headlines about the 70% of the population living in cities. This is not UK. This is driven by the Chinese megacities, where they're building, I think, 7 cities at the moment to house over 1 million people each city. This is because they haven't got the infrastructure outside of the city to support that level of population. So we mustn't think that that's a statistic for the UK alone. And the other point I'd raise is I've worked from home for almost 30 years. You wouldn't believe it looking at me, but 30 years. And up until this last year, I have been guilty till proven innocent. So comments such as, I bet your garden's nice, I bet you mow the lawn, you know, that's how it went because you work from home. Now you're actually, you're not guilty. It's okay to work from home and you're productive. And there's a whole new paradigm about presenteeism, turning up at a Teams meeting. You know, you don't have to go into work. And miraculously, the salary checks have still kept coming, even though you've not been in the office. So it is acceptable to do the daily slog on the computer from home.
Ironically, ironically, I think a lot of people are talking about they've never worked as hard. You know,
correct. Correct.
You
yes.
know, which is an interesting flip. Howard, I don't know if you want to have. We're running to the last 5 minutes now. So
yeah, I think we're moving away from sort of health and well-being, but it is all connected. That I genuinely think we're not going to be collating in those offices in any way like before, and that will have a profound effect on the whole building services industry. There's some positivity, there's some negatives, not really the same. And I think in terms of the point that I think that Sarah Deakin made in terms of the rural areas, I think that the more broadband internet spreads, and I'm involved in something in the north of England, also mega gigabyte internet. Once you've got that, the real benefit of going into a big town or city hub almost disappears, because if you can have, and this is why something we highlighted to ministers recently about the whole aspect of low carbon, you've got to have full digital. You've got to have, but with that comes a complete flexibility where you sit, what you do. And if we just look at the technologies that have moved on in the last 12 months, this time last year, we were all going to offices. And, I used to ignore Teams popping up on my system. Now Teams has moved on. Zoom we're using now has been developed, a whole manner of things. In 12 months' time, we'll be able to do more things in this technology than we can even think of. Why would we go to an office, apart from what we mentioned before, for it to be an experience, for the good of the company, and also companies will look at the bottom line. Do I want to pay £1 million for a central London office?
Well, I think that's a nice point perhaps for us to finish on there, Howard, because we've all experienced a very unpredictable and great degree of change in the last 12 months. And you're suggesting that the next 12 months, hopefully in a more positive fashion, will also bring a great degree of change. So strap in and get ready for the ride over the next year to come, I think. So I think on that note, we have a few questions we haven't quite got round to, including one about attention between net zero and healthy buildings, which is a whole other topic, I think, probably. So in closing, I'd just like to say big thank you to our panelists, Howard, Shord and Matthew, to the lovely people at ABB, our sponsors today, to yourselves out there in Zoom land for your comments and questions. A reminder to check Elemental, www.elementalexpo.com. It's the online community for professionals focused on innovation, heat, water, air and energy within the built environment. As I said at the start, in case you missed it, full diary of events on the website, loads of upcoming webinars, big back catalogue of recent sessions, all available free on demand to watch. That's it for today. Thank you very much to the people in front of me on the screen, especially. I've been Jim McClelland, editor at SUSMEAN. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Yes.